Alright, time for another member submitted deck, this time from Whoam1Again. It features Grysell's Arenai with Breakneck Slaughter. I really like Grysell's Arenai with their fast-paced glass cannon playstyle aggro. I'm sure you could play them more cagey as well, but there's no fun in that, at least I don't think so. So let's check this one out. Breakneck Slaughter seems like a really good match, so let's see how this guy has put them together. Let's just quickly mention before we start that if you would like to have your deck reviewed, membership is a requirement first up. And if you don't want to display your deck in a video such as this, simply getting feedback over on the member Discord is an option as well. Let's take a quick glance at the fighters first up, so you get a clearer idea of what the plan might be here. They are all fairly squishy, at least at first glance, with only the leader sporting more than 2 wounds. They do indeed all have 2 dodge though, apart from Traxia, who is the odd one out with a single shield, so I would initially not put her up front during deployment, as she might be very easily squished, which would be a shame given how accurate she is. She is sadly the one that is hardest to inspire as well, where she needs to hope for a crit on her 1 defense die, or wait for the 3rd round to inspire. Also, she is the least likely to mitigate any damage with the acrobatic feature this Warband sports, so basically weirdly enough, even though she rolls shields for successes, she can still hope for dodges to reduce the damage, but alas, only on 1 dice. As for the rest of the deployment, I would rate Calexis the least, with low damage from the start and slightly harder to inspire without buffs. Thriala does have a built-in combo attack from the start, so it would be a shame to lose her from the start, and Retaria is also very competent a fighter. I wouldn't use Grysell as a pawn either, but also don't be afraid to use her. So with that said, let's check the deck, and as always let's start with looking at the search objectives. Here we have acrobatic assault. We need to move through a fighter and then do a successful attack, which the deck and fighter supports in part. Out of the fighters, only Retaria can do this with flying during charges, uninspired and just plain flying inspired. She is a 2 wound fighter though, so based on just that, it's a very risky objective to take. There is also a Flourish Gambit, which is this Warband's unique persisting gambit style card that gives fighters the flying trait during charges, but I still think this is too little to mitigate the risk of losing Retaria. But luckily enough, there is also the Impossible Elite ploy doing much the same here, which he also has included, and this is about in the ballpark of support I would need as a bare minimum to take a card. Is it too much of an investment to score a search objective though? Maybe. I mean, flying has its own uses apart from scoring this card, but more so for a slow Warband that have a hard time getting into the fray of things. These guys should have no issue threatening all parts of the board without flying, and interestingly enough, Whoam1Again also mentions that he has an alternate deck that removes this objective as well as these 2 ploys for more generically useful cards, and I would probably hover more towards that setup honestly, but neither option is really bad, even though I probably favor beat to the punch a bit more, especially when you might have 2 chances to do damage your opponent first with the combo attacks present here. Next up though is Ritual Performance, which is a hybrid aggro search for either landing a crit or taking someone out of action with precisely the amount of damage needed. I like this one. We roll a fair amount of dice here, and especially with combo follow-ups the crits will come, and the second option here is a nice little alternate condition that is fairly doable as well. Heck, many warbands have one of these conditions on a single search, so having both here is very fortunate, honestly. Storm of Blades is your 4th attack in a round. Obviously, the warband can crumble, but we start with 5 fighters on 2 dodge, almost, at least. With damage mitigation and with combo attacks, this can actually be scored pretty quickly. Also, it doesn't require successful attacks, so I think this is a given. Hexbane obviously have the even better objective here with 4 attacks or 2 successful one as a hybrid, but we shouldn't be too greedy, I guess. It's still a very solid objective. Gale Force is even easier with your 3rd attack in a round without needing successes. Fantastic. Not fast enough is kill someone with a move or charge. This is basically our only objective that requires, if we disregard the hybrid option for Ritual Performance, a kill, and the requirement here is hardly very steep, but kill searches are always a bit matchup dependent in how fast they can be scored, of course. Still, I like this one as far as kill searches go. Out of Control is resolve the impetus for an enemy, or when the impetus staggers a friendly fighter. I quite like this one, as there's plenty of cards to hand over your momentum counters. The second option is a bit more telegraphed, as opponents will expect this card and rather push your fighters than stagger them, but as a whole this is very solid and very hard to stop. End phases then. Whoam1Again first up with 3 friendlies in enemy territory or all friendlies inspired. The second option is obviously an auto score in round 3 unless you've been wiped and then you're screwed anyway. The first one is quite tough as moving into enemy territory is very easy with the fast sisters of slaughter here, but can they stay alive there? And there is definitely defensive stuff in here with unquenchable fervor, blood sigil and devotee of slaughter, but apart from that they're all basically one-hit wonders. So to reliably score it we basically need to hope for the second condition, and a couple of them are a bit tougher to inspire, Galexis and Traxia specifically. Of course they can just die, but yeah, we shouldn't hope for that. We do have the moment of rapture ploy to help us inspire though. The sad part here is that we can only really reliably swap this objective with something worth less or something that is worth the same but not really easier to score. Running rings isn't terrible, but that asks too much of an opponent's positioning in my opinion. So even though I am dubious about Whoam1Again, I might just vote yes on it for the sake of the 2 glory being worth the risk for a slightly harder but not in any way, shape or form impossible card. Next up is our big juicy end phase for 3 glory, and it requires all fighters to be charged or have a wound counter. That is all fighters, friend and foe alike. This is extremely easy, for 3 glory at least, versus smaller teams without resurrection capabilities, but this is a very tall order once we face hordes that might never charge a big portion of their fighters and also has the capability to raise fighters than coming back without tokens. But at the same time it can be scored in round 1 versus elites basically, so it's wildly swingy. If we discard it we have 14 glory left to work with, so I can see me taking the risk of including it, mainly because there's really no fantastic options here to this card apart from maybe a 1 glory exalt in violence for having 2 friendlies inspired, which is a decent option I guess. Would I rather have 15 reliable glory or go for the extra 2 here? I'm not entirely sure is probably the answer, and it kind of depends on where the meta goes as well, right? And which opponents are more prevalent than others I guess. But I don't think going with either of these options is really horrible. Warrior Faithful is 1 glory for every friendly fighter being charged and or adjacent to an enemy fighter. We start with 5 fighters, but they ain't all seeing the finish line here, so being charged out should be easy peasy 1 glory. Eager for the Fight is my clear favorite out of all of these cards. It's even easier than the last one and gets you 2 glory for doing basically the same thing with less caveats. Need for Speed is a boring staple but very reliable, move a charge on everyone, and Rapid Strike might just take the second place after Eager for the Fight for killing at least as many as the round number, which is a very solid 2 glory aggro card. All in all I think the objectives all look very solid, but I would personally swap Acrobatic Assault and thus open up the Gambit deck for more universally useful buffs and effects. As for the end phases, I don't have any clear swap this out apart from the considerations I just talked about, with maybe looking over Whoam1Again and in praise of Kane's generic usefulness, but I'm also afraid we might aim too low with our glory with removing them, as we will bleed a fair amount of glory that we have to make up for. Gambits then. Daring Flourish is a risky one, and it's +1 dice but -1 defense until we succeed with an attack. So if we miss, we'll have a debuffed defense and thus also debuffed damage mitigation in the upcoming activations until we land a hit. I would use this on a fighter with combo, as the buff stays until a success is landed, or at least until late round when you know your opponent won't activate again. Still, accuracy is king, and I would be probably very hard pressed not to take it. Leaping Flourish I would sack, since I don't really fancy keeping Acrobatic Assault, but I'll get back to you on what I would include instead. Moment of Rapture is a free inspire after a successful attack, or Heal 2. I think Heal 2 is less useful as we basically only have 2 wounds. Many times we inspire after successful attacks already, though, so I'll have to get back to you on whether I think it's worthy an inclusion or not. But I guess doubling down on Inspire isn't an awful alternative with Traxia struggling on her own, and Vittoria might just outright kill her opponents, thus missing the stagger Inspire. So yeah, let's get back to it I guess. Next up is another Flourish that takes away combo but instead gives us Scything. This is pretty crazy paired with Assist and something like Star Performer with hitting on both symbols and with Devastating Charge and Reckless Charge that buffs our accuracy and damage for the entire activation. This can get really wild and bloody. I don't see me passing up on that possibility to slaughter the better part of, say, the Exile Dead or Canaan's Reapers that have fighters that kind of like to bundle up already. Good Lord. Unquenchable Fervor is just an amazing damage mitigation card that you simply can't leave home. Even if it's telegraphed, it stays until the end of the round or until damage has been mitigated in this way. Also paired with Acrobatics, it's fantastic. Devastating Charge I just touched upon. I might occasionally pass up on +1 damage ploys, but more so for teams that already hit like trucks. And this card, as I already mentioned, stays for the entire activation, so it's amazing for this Warband in particular with all the follow-up attacks they have. Impossible Leap does give us a momentum counter, which can be both a blessing and a boon, but I wouldn't take it on that merit alone, and the flying part is not really needed anymore with my twist on this deck, so I will sack it and get back to you on a replacement. Reckless Charge has already been mentioned, +1 dice for the entire activation is simply amazing. Sia is a nice way to manipulate the momentum economy and thus pushing or staggering opponents, especially after a failed charge. With your fragile fighters, it's nice to be able to push any adjacent uncharged enemies away as to not provide free swings on your bikini armored vixens. Slick Eyes is an Oprah Winfrey card. Everyone gets a momentum counter. After charging, that is. You are probably already getting momentum counters on your fighters most of the time, taking the upgrades I am yet to talk about into account. So being generous here towards your opponents is a sweet way of maybe making opponents consider moving instead of charging, or at least getting to push them around a bit if they do. So let's remove the ones I was dubious about. I have, after some thinking here, kept the Moment of Rapture with the Inspire/Heal hybrid and removed only the ones that gave flying, and added in Paean of Slaughter for rerolls for the activation. This is also for the entire activation, so in regards to the combo with Scything I mentioned earlier, this is all the more crazy. It does require our leader to be alive when we play it, but it isn't that lofty a requirement really, and if he is dead, just salvage it. He is the most likely to stick around anyway though. The other card I've added in is Roll with the Punches for a, yes, very telegraphed damage reduction, but paired with Acrobatics your opponent can't even be sure to kill your sisters with an on paper very heavy blow, and I think paired with all the other damage mitigation and defensive stuff we have in here, bringing down the Arenai could become a real tough nut for them to crack, and I love that. Let's move over to the upgrades. First up we have Blood Sigil, -1 damage from all attack actions, amazing. It basically makes Grysell 5 wounds without being large, and even apart from that it is, especially paired with Acrobatics, such good mileage for this Warband. Devotee of Slaughter is +1 wound, but not for the leader, still very solid and can't complain there really. Next up is Devotee of the Blade, which changes our defense to shields and gives our range 1 and 2 cleave. Out of stagger and snare and cleave, I think the latter is for sure the most useful. Still, I wouldn't take it on that merit alone. The defensive buff generally, unless we are meeting a lot of cleave with changing to shields from dodge, but still keeping the damage reduction on dodges, is not too shabby though. I'll have to get back to you on whether I think it's a good enough inclusion though. Next up is Lacerating Blows, which is a solidly accurate follow-up attack. Only 1 damage, but grievous, and just generally making more attacks is a win in my book. Piercing Strike is another one. It's slightly less accurate, but still not too shabby. No grievous with cleave on to Fury, not amazing, but we probably need it. Star Performer is hit on both symbols, but only while inspired. Still, that's amazing. Accuracy is, as I said many a times, king, or should I say queen. Battering Ram is +1 move and hand over your momentum counters. The sweet thing with this is that the reaction is after the deal damage step, so you can still drive back and then resolve the impetus, thus effectively both possibly like staggering and staying clear of said enemy fighters with the drive back, or depending on the state of play, pushing them even further away after the drive back. You have to damage them to trigger the reaction though, so keep that in mind. Still, I think keeping the reins over the momentum counters as much as possible though here is key. Living Hurricane is stagger and get a momentum counter after moving. I'm not too hot for the stagger honestly, but it has better mileage for these gals, as it might stagger leading up to your follow-up attack, so I'm inclined to keep it for that sake alone. I'm not too bothered with the momentum counters, as we do have enough tech to alleviate that. Moving Mark is another card that potentially buffs our defense, at least while we have move and or charge, with taking our defense to 2 shields while still reducing damage on dodge. I mean, the best mileage is really to put it on Traxia to get her on 2 dice, thus increasing our defense and her chance to mitigate damage. It does though give us another momentum counter when moving or charging. Standing Start is +1 move and momentum counters when we activate. This one feels redundant though. We don't really need the move, and we already have a plethora of cards giving us momentum counter, so I might be inclined to switch this one out. So I've removed Standing Start and swapped in Paragon of the Arena, which I was quite surprised not to see included here, honestly. It's a card that lets you react to your declare attack action step to get +1 dice, +1 damage, or a god token. Amazing utility, especially for multiple attack activations. I also removed Devotee of the Blade to add in another follow-up attack with Creep Lash, because I feel like including 3 of these ones is just about the sweet spot for me, that I can safely see them drawn enough. It's the worst of the bunch, but it's still worthy of an inclusion in my opinion. Yeah, you could also make a case for removing Moving Mark as well, but I think we shouldn't remove too many of the cards that gives out momentum counters, as we want that mechanic to be prevalent enough as well. So yeah, there's my twist on Whoam1Again's deck. So to backtrack a little, I only swapped one objective with Acrobatic Assault and added in Beat to the Punch for making the first damage in the round, basically. For the ploys, I removed the 2 Fly Gambits and added in Paean of Slaughter and rolled with the punches for extra accuracy and survivability, respectively. For the upgrades, I've removed Standing Start and Devotee of the Blade for more chances to draw into the pivotal follow-up attacks with Creep Lash, and also added in my opinion, amazing Paragon of the Arena. Another Dark Horse card you could also consider with all the momentum counters floating around here is the Unstoppable Warrior for a one-off super accurate attack, but I would be hard pressed to remove anything at this point, and I am going to leave it at this for now. So yeah, that is it. So if you have enjoyed this little deck building or deck twisting or deck evaluating endeavor of mine, please leave a like, comment, and do subscribe if you haven't already. So yeah, take care, bye. This is me again, chiming in to thank you for watching the video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. All of those things help me out immensely. If you feel so inclined, do consider to become a member to gain a greater influence over the content, early access, and just generally help me out. If you like this particular video especially much, feel free to click the thanks button as well to leave a small donation. All of those things are 100% optional, and I will never keep videos permanently locked behind a paywall, as my main goal is to spread the love for these games as much as possible. A special thanks to my members, whose legendary names are scrolling right before your eyes at this very instant. Don't forget, the games are not only about winning, but also creating unforgettable memories with your friends and opponents. That's it for me. See you soon. Bye bye.